Hey everybody, welcome to another episode here on Bully Whispers, and we are here today to do a comparison between Christopher Moltisanti from The Sopranos and Jessie Pinkman from Breaking Bad. This is an easy connection to make, since the two share many similarities, most notably being the mentee of their respective shows' main characters, Tony Soprano and Walter White. That being said, they are very different people. In many ways, they more resemble different characters from the other show, and they have very different relationships with their mentors. So in this, the first episode of a two-part series, we will compare Christopher and Jessie with each other personally, starting with each of their first and last scenes, before moving on to comparing their respective success with the ladies, their relationships with drugs, their personal relationships, their tendency to punch above their weight, as well as their personalities in general, all the while running into other characters along the way, with the next episode in the series comparing their relationships with Tony Soprano and Walter White. The first similarity we will take a look at is that both of their first and last scenes involve them driving a car, which in and of itself doesn't seem like much, but both are driving in the directions of their eventual destiny. With Chris, we first see him driving Tony to what ended up being a crime, essentially driving into the mob life and his own eventual death, while we see Jessie climbing out of a lovely lady's bedroom window and driving away from a crime scene and eventually away from that life in general. Speaking of lovely ladies, that brings us to our next similarity. Both of them had a way with women.
A lot of women found him very attractive.
He had really blue eyes. Really, really blue.
Yeah. He's dreamy. Okay.
Now, personally, and let me know if you disagree down in the comments, I think Christopher did way better than Jessie, and arguably better than anyone in either series, but I have to take a second for a quick side note here. I see comments all the time regarding how hot Chris's Las Vegas girlfriend was, and I agree, she was hot. But she was not his girlfriend. She was a hooker. The fact that she was sad when he died doesn't change that, and the fact that she hooked up with Tony shortly thereafter kinda reinforces it. Anyways, both Chris and Jessie played a role in the death of their primary love interest, although in both cases it could be argued that the women were more responsible for their own deaths than Chris or Jessie, with Adriana being a snitch and Jane being the one who introduced heroin into the equation. Speaking of heroin, that brings us to our next similarity. They both have a drug problem, though not the same drug. Chris likes heroin, Jessie likes meth, but both dabble in the other briefly. On that note, can you imagine if Chris was into meth instead of heroin? He was violent enough even when he was nodding off half the time. Switch that with meth, and he may have been Tuco Salamanca level crazy. Both Christopher and Jessie went to NA meetings where they found girlfriends, but the difference here is important to keep in mind moving forward. Obviously, Jessie played an indirect role in Andrea's death, but the big difference here is their reasons for going in the first place. Chris wanted to get sober, Jessie wanted money. Jessie went to the meetings to sell drugs to recovering addicts. He was not a good guy, but we will get back to that in a bit. This brings us to our next similarity, where, oddly enough, the differences really begin to show. They both can get too big for their britches, so to speak. With Jessie, this is most apparent during the time between Tuco's death and connecting with Gus Fring when they were trying to run Albuquerque on their own.
This is our city. All right? All of it. The whole damn place. Our territory. We're staking our claim.
At this point, being very naive about his own significance and attempting to punch well above his weight, he is a lot more like Jackie Jr.
We pull this off. We're like free agents. We dictate the terms, not them.
Although to be fair, Jessie does show some level of innovation with the magnet idea, whereas Jackie Jr. is just plain stupid, as Meadow found out when playing Scrabble. In that sense, Jackie Jr. would be a lot more like Skinny Pete.
Hey, man, I'm slinging mad volume and fat stacking Benjis, you know what I'm saying? I can't be all about, spelling and shit.
But that's a different episode. Unfortunately for Jessie, Jackie Jr. wasn't the only Sopranos character that he resembled during this period. When amping himself up to go get his money back from Spooge, he looks a lot like Artie trying to amp himself up to go get his money back from Jean-Philippe, but, with hair.
I still had my hair.
Had it not been for a couple of very lucky breaks, Jessie's attempt to get the money back probably would have been as successful as Artie's, and the reason for that is largely due to the biggest difference between him and Christopher. Even though he wasn't a good guy, at least for most of the series, Jessie also wasn't violent. With Christopher, we see him kill another gangster without permission in the first episode, whereas Jessie didn't kill anyone until the end of Season 3, and even then only with prodding in a serious situation. There were multiple times where both of them did something that would have, could have, or should have gotten them killed, but both got out of them due to their relationships with their mentors. However, those relationships would prove to be a double-edged sword when it comes to their next similarity. They both show a desire to leave, but face resistance.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
That brings us to their relationships with their mentors, which will be the focus of the second episode in this series. Ultimately, when it comes to their personalities, Chris was cut out for a life of crime at a higher level, and Jessie was not. That being said, Jessie showed a willingness to evolve that Chris did not, which is best seen through their cars and other purchases. They both start the series with cars they can't really afford and would draw attention.
Bear in mind, this is a kid who just bought himself a $60,000 Lexus.
If he had spent half as much time and money on his education as he has on that ridiculous bouncing car.
But Jessie learns and adapts, while Chris just keeps upgrading.
We'll take it.
He's what we call an impulse buyer.
Oh, shouldn't we see the inside first, sweetie?
If it has an inside, we're buying it.
Had Jessie had more of Chris's personality, he probably would have made a much better gangster, but instead he realizes it isn't for him and gets out. Now, before wrapping this up, we do need to acknowledge that Jessie is a different person by the end, unlike Chris, who really had no arc, but through most of the series he wasn't a good guy. He just wasn't violent. The fact that he didn't kill the bug doesn't mean anything. After all, Tony had a family of mallards living in his pool. You may point to his treatment of Spooge's kid, but I would also point out that even after he saw how bad meth had destroyed that kid's life, he still went back to making it. Well, thanks for watching another episode here on Bully Whispers. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.